This is the brand new Trek Emonda. For 2021, the bike goes disc only. It gets a smattering of aero upgrades. Tyre clearances have been improved, the weight has been dropped on disc models, and let me tell you, it is a joy to ride, but not entirely without its quirks. The original Emonda was solely focused on low weight, and it was possible to build that bike up as a true featherweight. But the demands that riders place on bikes have become more broad since then, but this is quite well demonstrated by the teams that Trek sponsors. So the riders on these teams have access to the Domani, Trek's endurance bike, the Madone, Trek's aero bike, and the Emonda, which is its kind of lightweight climbing bike. Trek claims that most of these riders would have been happy riding the Emonda in the majority of cases if it just had those little aero tweaks that we're seeing on most kind of do-it-all race bikes these days. Hence, the new Emonda. Now if you're wondering, why do I have this beautiful race bike in this lovely field? Well, no surprises, our offices are still shut. We're trying to stay socially distant. Felix is very far away, hence the weird setting. But none of that should detract from the interest and the intrigue, which is this lovely bike. So as should be obvious by now, the new Emonda is more aero than the outgoing model. Now, an aero climbing bike, that sounds a little bit daft, and it kind of is, and it sounds even more silly when I tell you that Trek specifically designed this bike around climbing Alpe d'Huez. That is correct, we now have climb-specific bikes. Jesting aside, the kind of thought process behind that methodology is that Alpe d'Huez, obviously an iconic climb, but it represents the kind of typical climbing conditions you're going to find when you're riding this bike. So with that in mind, thinking about the speeds that you would typically travel at on a climb, Trek claims that over the course of an hour, riding at a totally attainable 350 watts, Trek reckons you will save 18 seconds every hour when riding an 8% grade. And on the flats, riding at the same 350 watts, it claims you'll save a minute per hour. Now these are very specific claims and I have no way of independently verifying them. The one thing I will say is that Trek has been very open and transparent with kind of how it's presented this information. So while I'll always take those numbers with a pinch of salt, I'm inclined to believe them in this case. Now obviously with aero forming, and if you're familiar with the old Emonda, this is a much beefier overall frame, comes increased weight. So Trek has developed a new carbon layup, which it's calling OCLV 800, and it claims it's 30% stronger and 8% lighter than the outgoing layup. This new bike, in terms of aero performance, is said to sit kind of in the middle between the Madone, which is a total out-and-out aero bike, and the outgoing Emonda, which was very much not an aero bike, it was very much a climber's bike. Now there's actually quite a lot more aero tech to talk about on this bike, but you're not here for that. You want to know more about the bike's nitty-gritty details, so we'll jump straight to that. And one of the big things for me on this bike is the increased tyre clearances. Now this bike is officially rated to take 28mm tyres, but that is an extremely conservative number in my opinion. I know it's what Trek has to quote, but looking at the clearances, particularly on the fork, I reckon you could probably fit a 30, if not a 32 in some cases in there. It is truly capacious, and I really think that boosts the versatility of this bike, and if you ask me, will make it faster. The other really notable thing, and we've seen this with all of Trek's new bikes, is a threaded bottom bracket. Now, I am not afraid to say BB90, which was Trek's old press-fit bottom bracket standard, was terrible. This T47 standard, in my opinion, has next to no disadvantages. Sure, it might be ever so slightly heavier, but who honestly cares? I can fix it at home, it works with all crank sets, it just makes me happy. Now on this particular model, I've just got a standard two-piece cockpit, but on the higher end models, there's also a new integrated cockpit that's shipping with this bike. Now with that, you get some aero advantages, supposedly an 8-watt saving compared to a normal cockpit, but more than anything on that cockpit, it's got a really nice way of integrating the cables through the bottom of it. There's kind of like plates which sit and allow the cables to be removed without having to furiously fiddle your way through the actual cockpit, and you get all of that aero advantage, and it looks nice with way less faff than some other systems. A suite of new wheels have also been developed to go with the bike, and pictured here is the Bontrager Alias 35 wheels. They're the cheapest in the range at, I say just $898, rising to roughly $1,200 for the most expensive wheel set. Now, as you move up the range, you get a nicer layup, slightly deeper wheels, nicer spokes, that kind of thing. But the wheels are said to be based on a proven profile from Bontrager, and they kind of balance good, relatively lightweight performance with decent aero performance. It's kind of a best of both worlds situation where you're getting kind of a climber's wheel, but also something that's going to complement the aero shape of the frame. The wheels are, of course, it is 2020 after all, tubeless compatible. I have a lot more to say on that in my ride impressions. Now lastly, and it's kind of a surprise, but also kind of not, the bike has moved to disc only for 2021. Now this is a climber's bike, and if you want to build the absolute lightest bike possible, rim brakes are still the way to go. But the fact of the matter is, and we've known this for some years now, people are not buying rim brake bikes. That's it. Maybe you are, and good for you if you are. I still love rim brakes, but in terms of the mass market, disc brakes are where it's at. Now, it's probably quite a simplistic view, but I reckon Trek is, one, trying to reduce its inventory and SKUs which are in its lineup, but you can hardly fault them for wanting to make bikes that people are going to buy. Now, even I, a fully paid up member of the cycling Illuminati who's trying to force you to buy disc brakes, even I'm a little bit sad about this going disc only for 2021. Now we actually have two Emondas in for test currently. My colleague Warren, he has the top-end SLR model with all the bells and whistles and a frankly outrageous £9,700 price tag. But me, a man of the people, I'm slumming it with near Ultegra on the Emonda SL6 Pro. Compared to the SLR models, the only thing that's different with the SL bike is the layup. And here we have the OCL V500 layup. So you're going to have a slightly heavier bike overall, but the geometry and the aeroforming, the overall shape of the bike is exactly the same. So straight out of the box with no pedals, no accessories, this bike weighs 8.13 kilos on the nose in a size 56. It's nothing really to write home about, but it's light enough for this little lockdown tummy. Now this particular bike, as you see it here, costs £3,350. That's not cheap, but I really am going to say it. It does actually present okay value for money when you compare it to other bikes in the market. The geometry and fit of the bike doesn't present anything too out of the ordinary, though at 391 millimeters, the reach is on the upper end of the spectrum for a 56 centimeter bike. However, when you pair that with a 100 millimeter reach on these bars, it's actually quite a long position. It's not a bad thing. It kind of suits this type of bike and you can slam it nice and low, but it's worth bearing in mind if you are ordering a stock bike. The overall ride of the bike is best described as predictably stiff, exceptionally well-mannered, and hilariously fun in the way that a proper, unforgiving race rocket can be. It's got that addictive, ultra-efficient feel with a totally unyielding pedal response, which feels amazing on the climbs. I would even go as far to say that it almost feels a little bit old school in that kind of super stiff way that early carbon bikes were. Now, unsurprisingly, that super stiff frame set results in a bike which is pretty firm, and previous versions of the Emonda which we've tested were also noted for having a fairly firm ride quality. Now, it's not jarring per se. It still has that kind of pleasant, buzz-taming quality that any good carbon bike should have, but on bigger hits, particularly at the front end, it's a pretty firm feel. The alloy bars will contribute to this, as will the chunky aeroformed fork and head tube. But more than anything, I think it's the tyres that are to blame, and I'll talk about those more in a moment. Now, when it comes to descending, that really stiff frame set results in a bike which feels delightfully accurate when you're pointing downward. That really stiff front end with the chunky head tube, it does feel really good as you heavily brake into corners. And again, that kind of super fast, and I hate myself for saying it, but feedback-rich ride is totally addictive, and it's just really fun. Now, the only thing that really holds this bike back are the tyres. Now the Bontrager R3 tyres themselves are fine. They feel perfectly fast, plenty grip, but I do not know why Trek has spec'd 25mm tyres on this bike. Other bikes in the Emonda range come with 28mm tyres as stock, but wide tyres on road bikes make sense. They're faster on rough roads, the aero difference is marginal at best, and more than anything, they're comfortable. And if you're comfortable on a long day, you're going to go faster. It's pretty simple. So to go for 25mm tyres here feels like a bit of a cop-out. Perhaps they're trying to appeal to the weight weenie crowd and drop the weight of the bike a little bit, but it's fairly marginal, and I would much rather see wider tyres on this bike. More than that, the bike is set up tubed as stock. Now that wouldn't have been unusual a few years ago, and still a lot of manufacturers are doing that, but given these are tubeless ready rims and the likes of Giant shipping bikes set up tubeless, I would much prefer to see that out of the box. At the very least, I would at least like to see tubeless tyres spec'd. These particular tyres are designed specifically for inner tubes, so you're going to have to at least buy new tyres, sealant and valves if you want to set this up tubeless. Having a bike that you actually like the look of is very important, and I really like the lines of this bike. I'm delighted to see no dropped seat stays here. The lines are quite classic overall, and the traditional cockpit doesn't look too out of place either. Now Trek clearly doesn't want you to forget that you're riding one of their bikes, and that logo is almost comical in size. It's like a postmodern statement, the David Byrne suit of downtube logos. Now the bike is based on an Ultegra R8000 group set. I've said a lot about Ultegra in the past, but I gave it 5 stars when I first reviewed it. It is honestly almost flawless for a group set of this price, and just about as good as it gets for mechanical shifting. In terms of the gearing choice, I think it's a perfect match for this bike. You've got a 5236 crankset with an 1130 cassette at the back. So you get a gear which is spinny enough, but also fast enough for the flats. It is worth mentioning that the bike has a short cage derailleur, which means you are officially limited to an 1130 cassette. So if you want something slightly easier, maybe for your alpine climbing holiday, whenever we're allowed to do those, you will need to go for smaller chainrings if you want an easier gear. Now, I don't know if you're aware, but making videos takes quite a long time, so we're filming this a fair bit ahead of the launch. This means that these impressions are pretty initial, and if you want the full, hopefully scored review, head to BikeRadar.com in the link in the description where you can read my full thoughts on the bike. For now though, it's absolutely safe to say that if you're after a really stiff, compelling ride in a package which is, for the context of a disc bike, pretty light with, if you believe them, aero claims from Trek, this bike is not going to disappoint. So that's the 2021 Trek Emonda. Please leave your thoughts and any questions in the comments. We do always read them, and I want to hear what you think about my crazy lockdown hair, my hairy legs, metal bottle cages on a carbon bike, all the things which I've offended you with in this video. Also, thank you very much to our sponsors Madison for decking me out in this beautiful gear. Finally, do not forget to like, subscribe, and click that little bell icon so every time we upload a video, you will get a notification. Wow!